Howdy, folks. This video is from a show I recently did on Cameron Bertuzzi's channel, Capturing Christianity. If you like it, do all the YouTube things to let YouTube know to show the video to others. Be sure to like, comment, and share the video. And I am trying to grow my channel, so be sure and subscribe and hit the bell notification. Don't forget to check out Capturing Christianity and support the work that Cameron is doing there. Hope you enjoy this.
Right. So, how do you reckon this view that you're proposing of the afterlife seems to me more like the Platonic view or Plutarch's view, as N.T. Wright says?
Mhm.
Isn't the Jewish and also Christian view that first you die and then you go to Sheol, to the grave, and then eventually, during the end times, everyone is resurrected and judged? Isn't that what Ecclesiastes teaches, for example? In 9:5, it says that I know nothing right now. So, how does that work?
Yeah. Well, so let's deal with Ecclesiastes first. Ecclesiastes is written from an earthly perspective. You'll notice one of the recurring themes in Ecclesiastes and one of the recurring phrases in Ecclesiastes is under the sun. So the author of Ecclesiastes is assuming a perspective about here on earth and what do we know, and we don't see the dead rising up, and praising God. So he assumes they don't. But that's based on his perspective. They didn't have near death experience literature back in his day. So he's just going based on what he knows. In terms of there's no implication here of what ends up happening in this literature regarding the Christian view. There's no conflict because all of these experiences we're talking about today are occurring in the here and now. And all of the deathbed experience, all of the near death experiences that we have access to are from people who were dead only a short time. So none of them died and stayed dead until the resurrection. They died, they stayed in the afterlife, it seems, for a brief interval, and then they came back when the doctors were able to restart their hearts. So that doesn't really tell us anything about what's going to happen in the future. The Christian view would be, well, they stay in the afterlife for a while, and the Christian and Jewish and Muslim view would be they're going to stay in the afterlife for a while and they'll have a disembodied experience for that time. It's known as the intermediate state. But then eventually God's going to raise them from the dead. On the other hand, on a Hindu view or a Buddhist view, well, they die and they stay in the afterlife for a period of time in a disembodied intermediate state, and then they're going to be reincarnated. So these experiences, because none of them go for that long, they just don't address the question of what happens, if anything, after the intermediate state. The research data is also consistent with the more Platonic idea of you die and then you stay a ghost forever. Also, these types of experiences don't really tell us about what happens further down the line, and so they're compatible actually with multiple religious views.
Okay, and what would you say of the argument that in order to go to heaven, you needed something special needed to happen? For example, Elijah gets raised to heaven, I think, and
Mhm.
I think Catholics believe the same thing happened to Mary. There were other ways. I think that Ignatius, in his letters, he seems to think that martyrs go straight to heaven and that other people need to wait until the end times. As I recall it,
Okay,
I was listening to
so
Del
so
Martin's
yeah, so
view.
a common belief in Christianity is that Enoch and Elijah, two Old Testament figures, were assumed bodily into heaven without dying. In the Catholic and Orthodox view, Mary also had that happen to her. Either she did die or she didn't, but one way or another, she was assumed bodily into heaven. The standard belief, like with Irenaeus of Lyon, it's a pious belief. It's not actually church teaching, but it's piously believed that martyrs who have been killed go straight to heaven without a need for further purification. That's not actually church teaching, but it's a pious speculation. And they don't have their bodies with them because they were killed. That's what caused them to head into the afterlife to begin with. So they will get their bodies back at the resurrection on the standard Christian view.
Right, but the issue was that so why did Elijah have to be and Mary and so on have I mean, how can
They
they be
were
godly assumed into the spiritual heaven if it's not if it's not physical, right? If the physical heaven will only happen in the end times here on earth, how can those two views seem to be at odds,
well.
right?
So what Christians have understood is that heaven is at least capable of receiving bodies in some form. That doesn't mean they're spread out over space the way they are down here on earth, but they're capable of receiving bodies in some form because Jesus has his body with him up in heaven. And so all Christians who believe in the bodily resurrection and ascension of Jesus are going to acknowledge that in some way heaven is capable of containing bodies. We don't know what that way is. God hasn't chosen to reveal it to us, and we don't have scientific instruments capable of measuring the spiritual heaven, but it at least has the capability to receive bodies, which in exceptional circumstances it has. Now, the way the book of Revelation depicts our final state is down here on a renovated earth. Well, we know earth has physical bodies because we've got them down here with us right now. So there's no problem with the final state incorporating bodies. And in before we get to the final state, heaven is at least capable of receiving bodies, but they may not be spatially extended the way they are down here on earth. At least that's what I think we can say with confidence. You could speculate about more possibilities than that, but I think heaven is capable of receiving bodies in some form is about all we can say with confidence, and we have to leave the rest in God's hands.
Right, so I was thinking of the purgatory
Real quick,
teaching.
Tom, I'll let you have one more come back on this, and then we'll turn to other callers.
Okay, thank you. So if the martyrs get, rewarded and they go straight to heaven and other people have to be purified, shouldn't these other near-death experiences have a lot of purification? Or it seems
They
like
do.
most people just go straight to heaven, right?
Oh, number one, they're only experiencing, like I mentioned, they only experience a little bit of the afterlife. So they may experience a great, rush of wonderfulness when they get there. And they may only be able to remember the wonderfulness. They may not remember, oh, and I was also being purified. But in fact, there are a lot of case reports of people being purified. And this is, I'll just dip ahead to after death communications, for example. But there is a case in the literature where a gentleman, I believe he was in New York, was coming out of his house onto the street, and at the bottom of his steps, he saw a woman with her back turned to him, and she seemed to be she seemed to be a physical woman, but she turned around and it was his grandmother who was deceased. So he's seeing a visual apparition of a grandmother that is so realistic it's not transparent it's not glowing. It looks like a real person. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "I'm so sorry." And then she apologizes to him for all the things she did wrong in her life and says, "Please forgive me." And there are numerous examples like that where there are examples of people's fathers showing back up and saying, "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, my child. I was wrapped up in criminal activity earlier in my life, and I'm very sorry for what I did." There's a famous deathbed vision. So this is, again, the interconnection between the three phenomena. There's a deathbed vision where a little girl is dying of, what do they call it? It's kind of fever that results in excess bilirubin in the blood, and it causes you to become jaundiced. But she's dying of that, and she's having a vision of the afterlife. She's seeing, and this goes on for a few days in her case, and she's able to report about a neighbor lady who comes to visit her and says, "Oh, your son is here." and her son was dead. And so she is able to report on what the son is doing, and he's doing okay in the afterlife. He likes being there. That comforts the mother. But then another neighbor lady comes after the mother's gone and says, "Hey, wait a minute! Don't you remember how bad he was? I mean, we know he would always take your playthings and break them, and we wouldn't let. He would cuss, and he was a little hellion. We wouldn't let him." Near our children and or you, how can you say he's in heaven? And the little girl who's dying says, "Well, he says he is in heaven. He's learning to be good now." And that would reflect a Catholic understanding or an Orthodox understanding or a Jewish understanding of purifying us from our remaining, temptations and disordered desires. So that sounds like, even though this little girl was Protestant, didn't have the language of purgatory, she's saying, yeah, he's in heaven. He's learning how to be good, which is, she's like 10 years old. So this is not theologically sophisticated, but that sounds right. She also says God is, and I'll probably use more advanced words than she did, but she said, look at the environment he grew up in. Basically, he had all this cussing and stuff around him. He didn't know any better, and God takes that into account.
Okay, Tom,
Right.
I know you probably have more follow-ups, but we do need to turn to other callers.
And before we go, just a reminder to do all those great YouTube things. You can help my channel grow by liking, commenting, and sharing the video. And be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so that you always get notified when I have a new video. These days, I have multiple videos coming out every week. Thanks so much, and God bless you.